I heard once, it was life has the ceiling you put on it. And I have found that to be true. If you think that the ceiling is your job, the ceiling is your job. But if you say the ceiling is 2 rungs up, or being an entrepreneur, or working for General Motors, or whatever you say it is, and you're not there, you keep the people that I've seen that do well, that's their goal. And that's their North Star, for good or bad. That's
setting high goals. Is that saying? Another saying is like, you shoot for the moon, even if you miss, you're amongst the stars. So it's like setting, lofty ambition.
Yeah.
Welcome to another episode of the Matthews Mentality Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Matthews, and today we have the honor of sitting down with a legendary entrepreneur and business leader, Gary Kusin. Gary is a co-founder of 2 globally recognized brands, Babbage's, which became GameStop, and Laura Mercier Cosmetics. His impact on the business world doesn't stop there. He also served as president and CEO of Kinko's, leading his transformation and eventual sale to FedEx, where he integrated it into what is now FedEx Office. Beyond building companies, Gary has been a trusted advisor and mentor to CEOs across the industries. He spent over a decade as a senior advisor at the global private equity firm TPG. I know, I've heard of those guys. That's a big one. And has served on boards of major companies like Electronic Arts, Petco, and Sabre. An Inc. Magazine Entrepreneur of the Year award winner, he is also deeply involved in the Dallas community and a proud member of the University of Texas McCombs School of Business Hall of Fame. Hook 'em horns.
Yes.
Let's go, Sark. In this episode, we'll dive into Gary's journey in creating 2 global brands, how he shaped the gaming retail industry, and the lessons he's learned along the way. Gary, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
This is one of the things in the bio I didn't read, so I just want to ask you right away, is you recently wrote a book, Always Learning, Lessons on Leveling Up.
Yes.
How was that process?
That was really fun. I'd had a lot of pressure, I'll call it, to write that book after I slowed down my business career. And until I started thinking about my grandkids and documenting things that happened that were a little bit crazy, I decided to do it, and I have been having a ball with it. It tracks my growth from my childhood in a small town in East Texas through college into the business world and all the adventures I had along the way, but most importantly, what I learned. And it felt very important to me to pass along the lessons that I've learned to younger people who are early beginning their careers. In fact, I wrote at the end of each chapter, I made a list of what are the key important takeaways for readers as they go on their own journeys.
So that was the motivation. I was going to ask the motivation, but the motivation was, these are my words, but like to give back to a younger, newer generation in terms of, hey, learn from my experience.
And especially given my background in East Texas, I really do try to focus on underserved communities.
Sure.
People that don't perhaps have the breaks that I had. And who are eager and want to learn how to negotiate their own way through their own careers, for tips and tricks that I can give them. So that's of overriding importance to me.
Did you ever think GameStop would become the ultimate, meme stock, Reddit, Wall Street's bet?
No, the short answer is no. And my co-founder and I kind of laughed for the first week or 2 of that meme craze. And we decided that since it was so many years after we had left, that we would not speak to anyone about it. We started getting inbound calls in languages I don't know. I mean, would be on my cell phone. Could I please sit for an interview? And everyone know, how in the heck did this happen? And it was wild. And I did finally, for the first time in my book, talk about exactly what happened and why it happened and what I think about it.
They say reality is stranger than fiction sometimes.
Yes.
That was pretty wild. I mean, did you hold on, what do they call it, diamond hands to the moon? You held the stock forever?
No,
You're still holding?
No, my My boys, though, had fun with it.
I bet.
They had great fun. One of my sons is on Reddit and was let me know that was happening before it happened.
Yeah.
He's a Redditor and started seeing inbounds on it. And he let me know, and I didn't believe him. And then I started watching, and sure enough.
Yeah, because it's like, why this stock? But
Yeah.
I guess it had a connection to that community, especially that community. I think the understanding is they might have had, gaming might have been a big part of that generation's life growing up, and going to GameStop was an experience. And I'm going to ask you about like the vision and then the execution of GameStop, but you clearly saw an opportunity, kind of something culturally developing. Because I remember as a kid going to GameStop and.
Yeah, it is a very. You want to talk about that now?
Let's do it. Yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah, because it is interesting and has the pieces of it will make sense for people in entrepreneurial journeys of their own. So I went to graduate business school, and my best friend there, we were bookends. At school, if you're the top of the class, you become what's known as a Baker Scholar. And then there's the rest of us. And between the two of us, we were the bookends. And so when Jim left, he did what all top of the class people do. He went to Bain and became in very short order a partner at Bain. I went into department store retailing because I found an opening in a city where my now wife said she would love to live, which was San Francisco. So I went into the world of retailing, department stores in particular. About 2.5 years after we both started our jobs, I had become very skeptical about the future of department stores. It was clear to me that specialty stores were emerging and were in fact taking the lunch of the big department
stores. They
stores.
Were the preference of the shopper.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not an all size fits one company for everything.
Yeah. And I didn't feel that the senior leaders in our department store group, specifically Federated Department Stores, understood or appreciated. They were so busy trying to compete with the other department stores that every time I went to a mall and I walked through the center of the mall, I got a knot in my stomach. So that was kind of the stage. And when Jim came through Dallas, we were having dinner, and I said, so what are you working on at Bain? He said, I've got to tell you, I moved to the Silicon Valley to become the Bain partner on the West Coast, and my clients are all in this emerging area called video games. And I said, well, what the heck is a video game? So he started teaching me that business, but what he did is he showed me a deck that he used in speaking with game publishers that showed a bunch of hockey sticks from black and white TV in the 1930s, stereos in the 1950s, VCRs, color TV, all of those things. The adoption rates all were hockey sticks. And he said, that is going to happen here. So what I said was, sounds like it might, but let me tell you about what's going on with retailing. And I said, the state of retailing is that specialty stores are emerging very rapidly to become what I used to call an important, if not dominant, channel of distribution for whatever it is you're selling. So I said, if what you're saying is true, if you go back and look at the history of record stores and with the emerging growth of a small company based in Dallas called Blockbusters, you started seeing that this was real, that the coming video game systems were real. And
you identified the purchasing trend that was real or developing.
And I said, Jim, you know what you've got to do? You've got to quit your job at Bain, and I will quit my job at Federated Department Stores, and you and I are going to go start a company, because it looks to me like your crystal ball is quite clear on this, and I buy it. I buy the penetration curves. I buy all that. So let's do it. And we did. Bill Bain couldn't believe he was the first partner ever to leave Bain. They offered me I was at that point the ripe old age of 32, and they offered me a CEO job of one of the largest divisions of Federated Department Stores if I would not do it, which of course made me want to do it more.
Of course.
And we started.
What year was this?
1983. We opened the first.
So you really were early.
We were
in the
the
game.
first software-only store in the world. There were none, which is good news and bad news. The bad news is no malls want you because they haven't heard. Yeah. They think software is women's intimate apparel. They don't know what software is. It's a word that wasn't known. So
depending on the quality of fabric, it can be, but
yeah, true. But the world then was such that it was tough to find a mall to let us in. And we just worked. We finally, as an example of what it takes to start a company, no one would even let us in to see the owner of the mall. I hung around the mall till I saw him leave work one day, and I
Where
saw
was this
he
mall?
North Park Mall, one of the 5 largest malls in America. Ray Nasher's and his family owned the mall. I saw Ray walking to his car. I saw where he parked. I told Jim, we got to take our shot. Let's just wait for him to come out.
Shoot or shoot.
And that's what we did. And he came out, and we immediately said, we're good guys. But we shook hands with him, introduced ourselves, and told him what we wanted to do. And he said, well, why haven't you come to see us? I said, because no one will take our call.
Interesting.
He said, then you come and see me tomorrow. And we put together a deal, which became Store One. And it ended up 10,000 stores in 60 countries.
Yeah, that's a quick fast forward. Hold on. What, 1983, is it Atari? Like, what are you even selling?
Yes, it was Atari. Ninintendo's video game system hadn't even come out yet. So the big hardware type was the Atari 2600.
Mm-hmm.
That was called first gen. Following that was the Atari 7600, which was kind of generation 2. And then we started moving into brands which didn't exist for long, like ColecoVision,
Coleco,
Commodore VIC 64s, things like that until Nintendo came out. The early Nintendo, the Nest, came out in 1984, but hit broad circulation like 1985. Yeah. And that's when we knew we had something, because when you get to Miss Pac-Man and you get to some of the early Nintendo games, Super Mario Brothers, it exploded so that we didn't know how high was up. And I'm a very run and gun kind of merchant. So when we had 20 stores, I started buying like 200, and I realized those sold in 5 minutes. So then I buy 1,200, and then they'd say, well, wait a second, we can't sell you that many because that's what Toys R Us is buying, and that's what Walmart is buying. And I said, give them to me, and I'll sell them in a day. And that's literally what we did.
How did you buy that many? Was it on lines of credit? Were you raising, let me go back. Did you raise capital, start GameStop?
Yeah, so that's a whole other part of my backstory is that I sat next to Ross Perot at my high school graduation.
I've heard of that guy.
Yeah, my high school in Texarkana, the first year of desegregation was 1969. And as it happened, I was a student body president. And because I worked in my family's furniture warehouse, I was the only white guy in the warehouse. They used to call me the grain of salt and the pepper shaker. I knew over 7 years there, I got to know most of the black guys my age in Texarkana. When I heard we were going to shut down Dunbar High School, I went to them and I said, would you introduce me to the president of your student council? And we ended up having a meeting, and I said, what do we have to do to make this peaceful? And we sorted it out. We had a soul band for homecoming that fall. We did a bunch of things that a lot of schools didn't do, and ended up keeping a lid on it. And as a result, Ross Perot loved leadership. He had this thing, eagles don't flock, you have to find them one at a time. Well, he's sitting next to me when the Danforth, it was a surprise to me, the Danforth Foundation in St. Louis gave me a big national award for high school students for my role in keeping the lid on. And so Ross immediately took a liking to me, asked my parents.
He was older than you.
Yeah, he's my father's age. My father was his Boy Scout mentor when he grew up in Texarkana.
But the reason I'm asking, why was Ross Perot there? Is he from the area?
He was the first. He had just been on the cover of Fortune as the richest man in the world and the first billionaire in the history of the United States, like a month before our high school graduation. His company, Electronic Data Systems, had just gone public, not a large float, and he owned 90% of the company. So while it wasn't really worth all that because the float was so small, he had tons of notoriety. And he asked my parents if he could take me with him back to Dallas the next day. And that started a journey that culminated when I moved to Dallas to take this role in the department store in Dallas. The newspaper ran a big article. I was the youngest guy, all that kind of stuff. Ross saw the article, didn't know I was back in Dallas, and called me and said, "You got to start a company, and if you start a company, I'll back it."
So
And
he was kind of your big backer.
Long story short, I told him I didn't want his money. I enjoyed our relationship too much, and what if I lost it? And he finally said, never forget a 10 o'clock call one night, "Damn it, son, it's my money. I can do with it what I want. I'm going to back you." And so, okay.
That's so
And
cool.
the deal was he would be a third, and Jim and I the three of us would be a third, and a third owners. He would be the equity. We would be the sweat. And the only deal was we couldn't tell anyone he was our backer, because he said, "I'll become the lightning rod for everything. I don't want to be that, and y'all don't deserve that." And that's how we got started. And ultimately, Bain Capital, a guy named Mitt Romney,
I heard of that guy
who
too.
was best friends with my partner.
Yeah.
They were at Bain together, bought Ross out, and Mitt joined our board. And for the next 13 years, Bain Capital was our backer, along with, for the next 5 years till we went public,
When did you go public?
1988.
Oh, so that was, so you
Not
said
long-
you
not-
started at 83?
83, went public in 88.
Jeez, that was quick.
Well, we were opening, I was doing real estate. We were opening hundreds, and
Sure.
I did 700 leases myself before I got
Man,
the
if
head
on-
of real estate.
If
at
only
Radio
Matthews
Shack.
Real Estate Brokerage was around, we would have loved that tenant rep assignment.
Yeah, I got to tell you, the mall world. Whew.
Yeah,
So anyway,
it's changed a lot. Not a lot of
Yeah.
malls left. Not the way they were in the 80s.
That's
and
true, because you
90s.
could sit down with DeBartolo, and we did,
Mhm.
and do 30 deals at a time, and
Yeah.
that was really the key back then. Was
Yeah, and then I mean, you had exited GameStop by then, but then when e-commerce and kind of its relationship with brick and mortar came in, that was a whole another disruption to the industry.
yeah, and that's what led to the meme stock. I mean, you could see it with Blockbuster. Blockbuster, as I always told people, we were born because of technology, and we're going to die because of technology at some point. And sure enough, it took 40 years, but to run the full cycle. But that's what happened, because you don't need a brick and mortar store if you can download. You can download a game, and you can tie into players all over the world. You simply don't ever have to leave the sofa in your basement.
Oh, look, I played a lot of video games when I was a kid. Too many, looking back.
Probably Madden. No one knew it would be Madden.
Yeah, I love Madden. Madden was a big one. Zelda.
Yeah, sure.
Super Mario Bros. Contra.
Yep.
Even going back to like Nintendo, the Duck Hunts and all that.
Oh, sure.
But it and then Halo was kind of the last game I was in. It was like late high school, early college, and then you go into work, and I don't want to say you grow up. I just when professional, and then you build a family. There's a time component. Video games were the first to go.
Yep.
So it had been, let's call it 15, 20 years since I had really ever gamed. And then my son, my oldest, is 14. He enjoys gaming now. That he has to earn it. It's not an entitlement. It's a privilege. And but he said, "Hey, Dad, this new Call of Duty game's coming out."
Oof.
And I'm like, "Oh, cool!" Like, he was kind of like, "I want to get it," and okay, here's what you have to do to get it. And he hit those marks that I said you have to get straight A's, and you have to do X, Y, Z. He does it. And I'm like, "Yeah, let me know when you want me to take you to go get the game." He's like, "Well, I already have it." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Oh, I just downloaded it."
Yeah.
I'm like, "What?" And really, it's fascinating how the industry has evolved, and credit to whoever thought of this is kind of like the never ending spend that now exists. Because back in the day, when you sold a game, maybe you sold it for $49.99
right.
and it cost you $39.90 and you made $10, and that was the end of it, kind of.
Yeah, but now the in-game purchases.
There's no in-game purchases, it sneaks up on you. All of a sudden, you're checking the family, the family credit card, and you're like, what are these charges to Microsoft? It's Microsoft, and then it's an Xbox charge, and it's like $9.99 for the new gun skin pack. I mean, it's wild. It really is an incredible industry and how it's evolved. To your point, you said it great. Technology created it, and technology kills it. And same with Blockbuster, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So let me go back to you as a kid. You had mentioned that, you had given an incredible story, by the way, of that desegregation, and you effectively taken the leadership on, from your high school and then the other high school that was kind of like basically merging them. Was that just always innately in you? Was that a skill you were taught by your father? Like, I always ask the nature versus nurture question.
Yeah.
If I asked your parents,
I would probably say, and it's a very good question, and I don't know that I've been asked that question. I think I'm not born, I don't think, with empathy. But if you worked where I worked for the amount of time that I worked, and it was in my family's furniture warehouse, and again, they put me in there when I was 11 years old because I was getting in trouble. I was a little bit of a truancy problem at school. I was a wise ass. I was all that stuff and stayed in trouble. And my parents decided that every Saturday and every holiday and every summer I would work in the warehouse. As I said, I was the only white guy there. The things I saw happen to black teenagers my age who were in the truck, I was riding with them in the community, was unbelievable. And the things that I saw, particularly, and I write about this in my book, in Falk, Arkansas, where there is a billboard as you drive into town that says, if you're colored, don't let the sun set on your head, in Falk, Arkansas. And we would go there to deliver furniture, and my guys wouldn't get out of the truck. And when I'd knock on the door, the homeowners would look and go, you can come in, they can stay in the truck, and they would help me unload the furniture. So I was highly sensitive to all those sorts of things. And now all of a sudden, their school that was started when the white high school was started, that had as rich a heritage, perhaps even richer on the athletic side than our school, was going to be shut down and moved to our school. Well, I understood that was just yet another kind of indignity.
Yeah, you had empathy.
And I couldn't, and I wanted to do whatever I could do to smooth that as much as I could smooth it.
Why do you think, and you touched on it, the warehouse, was it as simple as you had experience and interaction with them at a time that maybe other whites didn't? But like, why do you think maybe others in your class didn't necessarily feel the same way, or maybe they felt that way, but they didn't actually take the initiative to effectuate positive change?
The same reason the world didn't. 100 years after the Civil War, it was still Texarkana's Old South. I mean, it was East Texas, but it was
East
Old
Texas
South.
is the South.
Yeah.
West Texas is different. But.
So I was highly attuned to what was happening in towns called Bogalusa, Louisiana. I'd seen Mississippi burning, all that stuff. So I'd seen it, and it was not right, and I couldn't let that go. And that's why when I say today underserved communities, it became part of my DNA. I would stand on a porch and look at I almost would cry at what would happen. The kind of conversations that were had were just not okay with me.
Now, you had tied your experience in the warehouse to getting familiarity, comfort, and empathy ultimately for the African American community. Do you think, or do you assign credit to that experience in the warehouse to also developing just your work ethic, your discipline, and really what ultimately became your leadership quality?
Another good question. You don't throw softballs here. That's great. This is fun, by the way. Good. I need to tell you, this is fun.
Well, I'm always so fascinated by why people are the way they are.
Yeah, I think that I just became very aware that everyone is on a journey, including me. And I used to sit around and wonder, what am I going to do? What am I going to be? I mean, other people, because I'm older, people don't know that, for instance, my parents asked me in the summer after I graduated from high school, so where are you going to go to college? That was literally what they said to me. And I said, well, I'm going to go to the University of Texas. And my father said, whoa, I didn't know you applied to UT. That's great. I said, what do you mean apply? He said, well, you got to apply. I didn't know that. No one had told me that. And I had to hustle for a week or so to get down there, get everything from the high school, take it, and get myself into UT. Everyone's on their own journey, including me. And while I was at University of Texas, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was holding down 3 jobs in addition to my classes, but I went to my brother's wedding, and at his wedding, everyone was talking about this other guy at the wedding, and they said he's the richest man in Wichita, Kansas, and he went to Harvard Business School. Well, at the end of a weekend here in Harvard Business School and richest, those words about 100 times each, I said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to Harvard Business School. And that's what I did.
Tell the story of how you got into Harvard. We were having breakfast. This was great. I love this.
So it struck. I read everything I could get my hands on about Harvard Business School, and there were some books out on it, but it was real clear that they wanted people who had business experience. And I figured, check that box. You know, I was in furniture warehouse. I went to University of Texas. I worked 3 jobs in Austin, and for 4 years, well, 3.5 because I got out early because I had to go. I ran out of money and I needed to do my next thing. So I filled in the application. I thought I had good people signing it, giving me references and stuff. And sure enough, I got a letter that said, congratulations, we've accepted you 2 years from now. We need you to work for 2 years. We need all of our incoming students to have worked for 2 years. And all I could think was they didn't read my application. I've been working since I was 11. This is silly. And I asked my father if I could borrow his car, and I got in his car.
Did you tell him where you were going?
Yeah.
Okay.
I drove to Boston, Massachusetts. I got out of the car in my white socks and my high water jeans. What did I know? And I marched right into the director of admissions office, and I said, hey, I got this letter, and I don't think y'all read it. I don't think you read my application because I've worked since I was 11, and you're telling me I got to work for 2 more years? That's crazy. And I'll never forget, the guy's name was Rand Nyland. And he started laughing. He said, after he said, gee, it was the mistake that we accepted you? What was the mistake? He said, you come sit in this conference room. I'm going to bring some other people. And all of a sudden, a bunch of guys in suits walked in the room. They sat around the table, and he said, tell them what you told me. I did. And they all kind of laughed at it. And then he said, what are you doing now? And I said, well, I computerized my family's furniture operation in Texarkana. Back then, IBM had a new small computer, and I'd been working on it in Austin, so I computerized the family business. And at nights, to stay out of trouble, I was in our family's bowling center, but then I took over the bowling center like 2 weeks before I drove to Boston, and that became my full-time job. And so I said, I'm managing a bowling alley. And they said, well, here's what we're willing to do. You go back and you send us the P&L from the prior 12 months before you got there. 12 months from today, we'd like you to send us your new P&L for the last 12 months. And if we like it, we will accept you after 1 year, which is a big exception here. I did it. And in that 12 months, we had more profit than we had revenues in the 12 months before I took over. And I explained how I did it in the book because everyone wanted to know, how in the world did you do that? That's another fun story. But I did it, and they took me after 1 year, and that's the rest is history. By the way, I loved my time at business school, and that is a place where I walked in, and I started feeling, first time in my life, kind of maybe inferior. You know, these people in the room are smart people.
Imposter syndrome, maybe.
Yeah. I guess I could. That's it. And
were you the most country guy there?
No, there's one other guy in my class, a guy named Bill Young, and he had kept his mouth shut until like 3 weeks into school because I had really bad. It's one of those things. The teacher calls on you, and if you aren't prepared for a case, that's like call home, tell them you ain't gonna be a business school student, and people start disappearing in the class because it was tough.
Yeah.
And we had 11 people go away. So anyway, one day he called on this guy in class, Bill Young, who's from Crawfordsville, Arkansas, farming family. And don't remember what the question was, but the answer was in layman's terms, well, isn't that obvious? That was what anyone else in the class would have said. And he said, well, it's like a wild hog finding an acorn. And I started laughing.
Yeah.
I'm the only guy in the class. Nobody else knew. What in the heck does that mean? But I loved his accent. I mean, I just loved it. And I was laughing. I was pointing across the class, and we've been best friends.
And he survived.
Oh yeah, he made it. He made it. Smart guy, very smart guy.
Probably a great place to build relationships, network. Obviously, learn something about operating a business, but perhaps most of that's just intuition and real life experience.
Yeah.
But let me jump back. So because I want to kind of go through your career arc before we do. Were there mentors you had growing up? Like, your father, maybe people around you, you mentioned Ross Perot, but how big of an influence or how critical to your, having success in college and then Harvard Business School and ultimately the success you had in your career, how critical potentially were mentors or a mentor of yours?
Yeah. So my most important mentor, teaching me things that have been important for my whole life, was a guy named Julius Murphy. He was a kind of senior guy in the warehouse. And in fact, we're till today's 88 and we are still very, very close. He taught me how to move furniture, how to pick up furniture, how to carry furniture. He taught me how to refinish something. If a tabletop was scratched, how do you fix it? He taught me how to load trucks. He taught me how to get a sleeper sofa into a trailer home, things like that. And what was important for me was he was helping me. He truly wanted me to be successful, and I did not want to let him down. For the first time in my life, here was someone talking to me, and all I wanted to do was make him proud of me. And at the bowling center, he actually he was in charge of the back of the bowling alley, all the machines and equipment at night. So he'd work during the day at the furniture store, and then he'd go to the bowling alley at night. He and I we cemented our relationship for the year I was at the bowling alley. We, in fact, were a scratch bowling team. The two of us, he was the first black guy to bowl in the scratch league.
You're like the Big Lebowski?
And everyone there loved Julius because he was there every night of the week. But he and I bowled together, and he was my best friend.
And bowling, two of my favorite movies, there's The Big Lebowski, and then there's a comedy, Kingpin. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's a little bit more of a cult classic.
Yes, but I've seen
two of the funniest movies I've ever seen about bowling.
Yeah, my family owned it, so there were 4 kids in my family, and we had to walk over to the bowling alley after school each day. So all 4 of us at one time or other were state champion bowlers, including my sister and my two older brothers.
Do you still go bowling, or?
I did. This wasn't in the book. There's a guy whose family, he's my wife's college roommate's husband, who was from the same kind of family, furniture and bowling in Miami, Florida. And we used to he was a scratch golfer, by the way, and I was furthest thing from it, but we kept trash talking over 30 years. And then we would go to his daughter's wedding at Emory in Atlanta, Georgia, in the Student Union building. And after the Friday night rehearsal dinner, all the people who came to the wedding, they took over the bowling alley. And Tim and I were standing there watching. Tim said, "Let's do this." And I said, "I can't. Yeah. We're going to bowl. We're going to find which of us is better bowler." And I said, "I don't have my ball here." And he said, "I don't either. We'll use house balls. We'll use house shoes." And with everyone there, I bowled 264, and he was somewhere way back in the rearview mirror. And he was kind of, I started with 8 in a row. That's a high point. It's funny, and I sat down. I kept sitting down and telling my wife after each frame, act like this is normal.
Yeah, I was going to say,
don't let anybody know. Don't let anybody know this isn't normal. And at the end of the game, I said, "Tim, I'm done. I'm never bowling again."
No, you're done. You're tired.
That's it.
Go out a winner.
Yeah.
Speaking of winner, you founded GameStop 82, 83. You went public in 88, and you fully exited 95.
Yes. It started a cosmetics company.
Well, I'll touch on that. Growing up in Texarkana, and maybe not so much your family, but probably rural and not necessarily all the money in the world. And by then you had met Ross Perot, but what was that like, that moment? And this is where you might have to educate me, whether it was 88 or 95, like that kind of what they call the liquidity event.
Yeah.
Like we've had guests on when the wire comes through, and what goes through your head when all of a sudden you realize, just from a pure financial place and wealth place, that your vision, your goal was executed and fulfilled, and that, financially you're probably going to be pretty comfortable the rest of your life.
Yeah. So the fact is, I didn't sell my stock when I left because I thought it had
diamond hands.
Diamond hands.
That's what they say.
I didn't because we were going. I always knew we would be bigger and more valuable, and then we merged with our biggest competitor, and that deal kept breaking apart. We never got it to close. Our biggest competitor was based in Minneapolis, called Software Etc. Stores, and their owner was a guy named Lynn Riggio, who was the founder of Barnes and Noble, and we kept making it to the altar and never consummating the deal. And it occurred to me, the reason was they had two people running their company, and Jim and I were two people running ours. And the deal was we're shutting down Minneapolis, and we're going to move some people to Dallas, but not all of them. And Lynn kept telling us, no, it isn't I said, I think the reason this is really falling apart is they're going to lose their jobs.
Yeah.
And he said, it's not that. And so our board met, and they said, let's just let this go. And I said, I want to take one more run at this thing. And I said, frankly, I think if I can offer one of them my job, I'm an entrepreneur and I do other things, we can make this thing happen. And they said, well, we think you're crazy, but if that's what you want to do. And so I called Dandy Matteo and asked him if he'd meet me in St. Louis at the airport. I wanted to talk with him further, and I did. And I said, look, I know this isn't why the thing died, but I can go and do some other entrepreneurial things. And if I did, it would seem like you could step in, and you and Jim, my partner, could run it. He'd be the CEO, you'd be the president. I'd still be in Dallas and everything. And he was like, no, it's not that. It's not that. And a week later, I got the call. It was that. And so
that's why you exited.
Yeah. I had to make that happen.
But you held your stock.
Yeah.
But even, all right, let me just say, with stock being effectively liquid, 88, you go public. What was that moment like?
It was, well, so I mean, to be honest, I had been living outside my means for a lot of years because I hadn't had an event, and I had 4 kids at that point, all in private schools. We had bought a very nice home, none of which I could afford, but everything I could buy on margin with my Babbage. I could do whatever I wanted to do with margin on the stock. And so that's what I did, but it never, all of a sudden I could afford the lifestyle we already had.
It was like a relief almost.
Not almost.
It was
big
a really
relief.
Big relief.
Yeah. And I took more out on margin to start the cosmetics company, which led to the big meltdown where I went almost bust several years later. When when GameStop went bankrupt and Lynn Riggio bought it out of bankruptcy. Well, I didn't even know they were in bad shape because I was too busy building Laura Mercier.
But you still held a lot of stock?
All of it. Yeah, and I'd borrowed on margin, and I was, and I didn't know why the bank hadn't contacted me. And this is an interesting story, actually. I called the president of the bank, and I said, I got to talk with you. I busted covenant. I'd gone to an electronic arts board meeting in Austin, Texas, waiting for my plane at the airport after the meeting. I opened up a newspaper. I wonder how, let me check. It was called, the parent company was called NeoStar Retail Group. Wonder how NeoStar is doing. And I looked, and I was good. The lowest the stock had ever been on my watch was $10. It had been up to $30. And I had so much stock that it would have to drop to under $2 a share before I'd be in trouble. Well, I looked, it was $1 a share. I was at I literally went in the bathroom at the airport and vomited. I was like, I'm broke. Yeah. I got nothing. I can't cover the call. And so Ron asked me, the president of the bank said, come over here tomorrow and let's see let's understand that better. So I come in, lots of bankers sitting around a table, and I gave him the whole story. And Ron said, Ron Steinhardt, the president of Bank One, said, have to tell you, I've talked with these guys. None of us in our memory have ever had someone who owed money to this bank come and self-disclose like you have. And he said, we're more shocked by that than anything else. So you tell me how much time you think you need to be able to cover this. And I said, I don't know, but maybe at least a year. He said, we'll give you a year.
That's great. That's the value of a relationship.
And it's a value of honesty.
Yeah.
And so I immediately then went to my accountant who I trusted with my life And he said, look, you got 3 assets in the world. He said, you've got Laura Mercier Cosmetics, you've got your house, and you've got you. And he said, you got to move 2 of the 3 of them. You can no longer run Laura Mercier. You need someone else to run it. You got to sell your house. We had a very big house. And you got to get a real job that pays you what you're worth. And so I set about doing that. And I didn't do 2 out of 3. I did all 3 of them. I was so mad at myself that I'd let down my family. I'd let myself down. It was the toughest point in my life. And sure enough, I was able to sell the house. Sure enough, I was able to sell Laura Mercier, Neiman Marcus. And selling Laura Mercier, Neiman Marcus covered everything.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But then I was still mad. It didn't matter. I was mad at myself. This was all about me. And I got a job in the serviced office industry, which is, think WeWork. It was called it, and became the biggest in the U.S. in 3 years. But I did it because I was mad. I didn't like that business, but I was mad at myself, and I just decided I needed to be in the penalty box. Until Kinko's came along. When Kinko's came along, it's like I've spent my whole life preparing for Kinko's. And I know I've never in my core felt that strongly about anything. I went to 40 Kinko stores, walked around, talked to them, watched customers, spent a couple weeks in there, and I called the PE firm that owned them and said, I'm your guy. I don't know who y'all are looking for, but I'm your guy. And they laughed, said, well, we're going to send you to the search firm, Spencer Stewart, who's running the search. And I said, well, there's a problem with that. My sister was the vice chairman of Korn Ferry. Said, and she and this guy don't like each other very much. They compete for business, so that won't work. And so he said, okay, come on in and see me. I went in and saw all of them, and they narrowed it down to 3 people, and I was one of the 3, and they ended up giving me the job. And so that was my labor of love in my career.
So there's a fascinating kind of period of time. So I asked the question, what was it like to have this kind of a liquidity event, though you held your stock? And again, in many ways, being kind of on top of the world. I started this company with my partner. We knocked it out of the park. We saw this trend. We went public. By 95, there was this big merger. Part of the reason you're like, hey, I can go do other things. So you're riding high. And I think a lot of audience members was like, man, if I started a company and I sold it and I got a bunch of money or stock, like what would that moment feel like, right? And then, fast forward, what is it? That was 95. So fast forward to 98.
Yeah, when I sold Laura Mercier to Neiman Marcus.
Yeah, just before that. But like, okay, that's 95. Then fast forward a couple of years, you're sitting at an airport realizing that you're effectively underwater.
Yeah.
And that from a PFS personal financial statement, you effectively have no net worth in a sense, right?
That's correct.
That's got to be that's got to be kind of a crazy period of time and just a trip to go for, like you always hear is like, oh, I was on top of the world. And then fast forward, I mean, from a professional sense, you very much lived that life.
Yeah.
How do you, it seems like there are plenty of stories of someone who's on top of the world and for whatever reasons, both within and outside their control, they lose it all in a sense. But they don't recover. They kind of enter the valley of despair and never come out, or they just, whether it's depression, drugs, alcohol, who knows what it is that they turn to. But for you just said, oh, this is on me. It's my fault. I'm going to put myself in the penalty box. So you sell Laura Mercier and go take, kind of a job. What was it about you that allowed you to effectively bounce back, rebound from that moment that others may not?
I think you asked the question earlier, who were your role models when you were younger? Other than Julius, I didn't really, don't get me wrong, I love my father. We had a good family and all that kind of stuff. And my mom was okay. She was a little piece of work. But I knew I had to rely on myself my whole life. And so nothing was ever a surprise to me. When something happened good, I go, good on me. Glad that happened. What's next? But I felt the same way when something bad happened. Okay, what'd I do this time? What can I learn from it? And so I'm fiercely independent. I hate people telling me what to do. And when I was told, all you need to do is tell me something I can't do. and you're going to see me get after it. And that all comes from being fiercely independent, I believe, and from always having to prove myself. My brothers were both rock star intellects, and every year you go to school and the next grade's teachers go, "Are you as smart as your brothers?" And it's like, not even close. Can we stop asking that? No one ever stopped asking that, almost till today.
I'd like to think my younger brothers had to deal with that problem, but I don't think they did.
Well, my sister and I had each other, and so
my sister was a valedictorian in my high school. She was a year older, so actually, good point. I had that.
Yeah, and interestingly, and Melanie and I used to think about it, she was at the top of her profession too, and we're just a little family from East Texas, and two of us really crushed it, and
yeah. So, so your background certainly played a big part. I'm going to ask you a very specific question. You're on the retailer side, or the department store side, I should say, retail and commercial real estate. And then you go into consumer electronics. Where did the cosmetics idea come from? I mean, you enjoy makeup? Is that a thing?
Yeah, no, that isn't
Not
a thing.
to get personal, but
but you have to know when you have 4 little kids and the 2 oldest are boys and the 2 littlest are girls, and all I'm ever doing is bringing home video games of gunfire and stuff, and my girls are like, what are we? So, but really then couple that in the department store, I was the senior merchant for all women's everything.
So you were a buyer.
Well, I was the buyer's boss's boss's boss. So I ended up being over the whole store, but the area I cut my teeth in was cosmetics.
Okay.
And I developed
That's the answer. Yeah,
I developed a point of view of cosmetics.
What was that point of view?
That point of view, which led me to do Laura Mercier, frankly. My point of view was, if you look at the history of the cosmetics industry, it's been through 3 phases over the first 100 years in cosmetics. The first was makeup artists. In the 1930s and 40s, a group of makeup artists emerged as important. They had names like Estee Lauder,
Heard of that one?
a makeup artist who did nothing but apply makeup to movie stars and cover girls and things like that. Princess Marcella Borghese was a real person. The Revson brothers started Revlon, and it was nothing but a group of makeup artists that created an industry where they told the everyday customers, hey, if you're Estee Lauder, you could look as beautiful as a cover girl, or you could look as beautiful as this movie star if you use my makeup. And that just sent the makeup industry to the moon. The next phase it went through was technology. All of a sudden, cosmeceuticals emerged. Lines like Clinique, lines that their features and benefits were developed in a lab. And they said, we understand skin. We understand how powder bonds on your face. We understand mascara. Whatever it is, the labs produced it, and it made customers go, okay, this is a righteous
approach.
Yeah, righteous product. And so they would buy it. And then the third was fashion, was Chanel coming out and saying, gee, the hot color for this fall is red, and our red is the red for this fall. So all of a sudden, all the designer lines added cosmetics. And that's where I was. Okay. When I ran the cosmetics business, that's where we were, kind of bridging from cosmeceutical kind of stuff to that. And all of a sudden, when my buddy, I had a YPO buddy that was president of Neiman Marcus, and he and I would go eat lunch because I still love the department store business. It's where it's where I learned business. And I'd ask him what's going on, and usually it'd be nothing new, nothing different. In one meeting, he said, you wouldn't believe this new cosmetics company called MAC, stands for Makeup Artist Cosmetics. He said, we put it into Neiman's. We have never seen cosmetic sales like this. And then we added a second one called Bobbi Brown, and Bobbi Brown is exploding. And I'm sitting there thinking, wow. And this was my thought. Everything old is new again. It is in most things in the world, and makeup artist is going to be the next trend. I know what I'll do. I learned a little bit about Bobby Brown. I learned a little bit about the folks that started Mac. And I figured, you know what? That's great, but I don't think any of them attacked the sector coming at it strictly business analytically in the way that I was kind of approaching it. And
Did they approach it more like an artist would?
yeah, they were all artists. Bobby Brown's an artist, makeup artist. I mean, they just were. And I was doing it from, no, what kind of business can we build here? What would be the key components and stuff like that? I wanted someone to run it for me because I'm no face for a cosmetics company. I'm no face for anything, but particularly not a cosmetics company. So I asked Terry Lundgren for a name, and he gave me a name. And I interviewed her. I thought she was great, and so she joined me. I put up all the money, and I was kind of.
Who is that?
Her name Janet Gerwich.
Okay.
And
I wanted to know, where does the name Laura Mercier? Like
Laura. So what we did was we asked meaning Janet, asked the 5 top fashion magazines at the time, which were Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, Mademoiselle. I don't know. There were 5. Who are the 5 best makeup artists in the world today? 3 names were on all 5 lists. One of them was Laura Mercier. Janet and I interviewed each of them, and Laura was the only makeup artist that was a true French woman, true passion for cosmetics. So he said, "You're it." And we put together a royalty agreement with her. We put her in a lab with a bunch of scientists, and she got to develop the line she always wanted to do. And so we put it out as Laura Mercier Cosmetics.
And then this thing hit fast because it seems like you kind of founded it in 95 and then sold 98.
Very high end of the market. And of course, Neiman Marcus Janet came from Neiman Marcus, and I knew Mr. Stanley. I knew Stanley Marcus. I mean, I knew folks there, and that led to Bergdorf Goodman. That led to a lot of other high-end stores. And so we were starting with a pretty built-in, and sure enough, her cosmetics sold. Particularly, she had a foundation product, a facial moisturizer product that was like best in market.
And you gave your reason for selling was what was happening, having borrowed on the margins of your GameStop stock. That was the reason for selling?
Well, it was, plus I was not happy. I did not like the cosmetics industry on the other side of the table.
Why not?
They're cutthroat. They're mean. They run over people. If God forbid you work at a cosmetics counter, they're pretty brutal to you, and you get to eat what you kill, which is great, but they don't, without good training, without good management, without good supervision, all that kind of stuff. I didn't like the way some of our folks behaved in our company.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fast forward, you had touched on kind of how you went about securing the job as a CEO of Kinko's, visiting 40 stores, kind of circumventing the conflict potential on the recruiting firm. What was that like when you got the call that you were going to be hired?
I was so excited, I couldn't stand it. I mean, I really was. For me, that was my dream job. We had already, because I'd been trying to sell my serviced office company, but a guy there, the Notre Dame friend of mine, who had been a partner at Bain, I hired him out of Bain to join me when I was in the serviced office business. We were working on a 90-day plan for 6 months before I stepped into the job, because the PE firm gave me time to sell it. They knew I was very close to having another big payday, and they let me stick around for that. And we put together the plan so I could hit the ground running, which made a lot of sense. Of course, life doesn't ever work out that way. So.
No, it doesn't. What were some of the biggest opportunities or challenges that you faced?
The biggest issue was I decided a company losing $11 million. By the way, they had put into my deal that if I had 9 months to tell them if we needed to shut down Kinko's because it was hemorrhaging cash. And so they gave me 9 months. I immediately, the first day I walked into the headquarters in Ventura, California, nobody knew who I was from Adam, and I showed up there very early in the morning. No one was there. When people started showing up, I started walking the floor, and I couldn't understand. Half the people there were wearing wetsuits. So I finally asked someone.
Yeah, I went to high school in Ventura County.
Okay. And so I asked them, what in the world? And they said, surf is going to be perfect at noon, lunch hour, we're going surfing, which was right down the hill from our headquarters. And it occurred to me, no one there knew or cared about the situation the company was in. So what I said was, folks, I'm leaving. I'm going to spend the next 6 weeks to 2 months traveling the world of Kinko's, and I don't want anyone to come with me. I'm going to go by myself into every single market. I'll let them know when I get there who I am, and I'm going to have town hall meetings. We're 24 hours a day in all 1,200 stores. On every single shift, I'd run a town hall in every single market. And for the next 6 weeks, it was more like 8, I went into every market in the U.S. and did town halls, and I always start them the same way. Hey, guys, we're suffering here. Tell me, how did this happen? And what do I need to focus on as a new CEO in order to fix this thing?
What was the biggest feedback?
Guess what happened?
What?
They told me, they gave me chapter and verse
They knew
on what was wrong. Of course they did.
trends,
They're where the customers are.
Yeah.
And that's my first, what I tell every company I've ever involved with. Napoleon said, if you want to know what's going on the front lines, go look. And that I'm used to doing that. I'm used to walking floors. So I knew what to do. And the problem was Ventura. So I got a little bit of help. I shouldn't say it that way. So I made the first meeting when all 185 of our field senior leaders across the network would all come together. We all decided to come together in Denver, and I was going to give them a readout, and Dan Connors had helped me build the guy who had come with me to Kinko's. I had my EVP of Biz Dev and Strategy. And the date of that meeting was September 11th, 2001. So that meeting quickly went away. And within a week, I'd somewhere along the line heard, you don't ever let a good crisis go away.
Yeah, I think that was Rahm Emanuel.
And so I announced that we were going to move the headquarters of Kinko's from Ventura to Dallas. And that's what we did.
And that solved...
that did not solve any of the underlying problems. It solved the Ventura. We had 1,500 people. I immediately reduced it to 900. And then when we figured out how many people we needed in Dallas, only 50 of them made the trip.
Okay.
And we hired a whole new set of folks. But the real problem had a lot more to do with 24 hours a day. You don't need to be, when there are 5 stores in a 1-mile strip of highway, you don't need all 5 of them open 24 hours a day. You don't need all 5 of them to have over $2 million worth of equipment in them, and on and on and on. We needed to deleverage our scale, if you will, is our first thing, and flesh out a large commercial sales force. Those kinds of things, you can imagine, well, the results showed what happens when all of a sudden they're not 24-hour stores. Some of them are. A lot of them go down to 12-hour stores. Some of them are 18-hour stores. But only a small handful are 24-hour stores.
Or even need to
opening a group of production centers around the U.S. that we could move jobs to instead of having every store capable of printing every job. Go on and on and on. And they all, frankly, everything we did worked.
And that led to a sale to FedEx.
Yes.
And that must have been a big moment for you, right?
That was the moment. And it was, big payday. It was $2.4 billion all cash. But that wasn't, I was proud.
Sure.
And I was proud of the team. There's so much that the founder of Kinko's did right, Paul Orfila, but one of it was spreading stock deeply into the company. And a lot of those store managers had been store managers before. So the money that was paid out to store managers was life-changing. And I tell this story in the book. Carlene and my wife and I were sitting on a plane as it was loading. We were going somewhere sometime. And I happened to look up, and a guy was standing there staring at me, and I didn't know who he was. And he said, "Gary?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "You don't remember me?" He told me his store number and all that. He said, "But I told my wife if I ever saw you, I'd ask you if I could hug you." He said, "Because we took the proceeds when we sold to FedEx. I paid off the house, sent my kids to college, and my wife and I have a retirement account."
Oh, that's great.
And he said, "Would you mind if I hugged you?" And by that point, I'm crying, and he's hugging me. My wife's crying, and people are looking around going, "What's going on?" But it was life-changing for lots of people.
That's
and
awesome.
That made me proud.
That's what I was going to say. Very fulfilling, the pride you felt.
Yeah.
What were some of your other motivators along your your professional journey up to that point? Like, what were some of the other drivers or your why, so to speak?
I I have always tried to level the playing field. When we went public at Babbage's slash GameStop, of the 12 officers of our company, there was Jim, there was me, and there was a guy who ran our IT area. The other 9 were women.
Mm-hmm.
That's in the video game industry.
Yeah, it's not common.
And they were superstars to a person. And same thing in the cosmetics, not surprisingly. And then the same thing in the senior ranks at Kinko's when I took over there. It just has always felt important to me to help others on their journeys if they're qualified. Now, you didn't ask me, and maybe you should, how I interview people.
How do you interview people?
That's well, I only care about 2 things. First of which, I need them to be able to tell me when I say, what's your aspirational goal? I want them to say, I want your job. Okay. I got to hear that somewhere in there, and I can throw them some slow pitches, but they got to say that's number 1. And then number 2, and these 2, I'm indifferent. A lot of people ask me why I'm indifferent. I need people who either feel like they have to win or they refuse to lose. They're different types of people. But if I have someone who either refuses to lose or will win and they want my job, then my job gets real easy.
Yeah.
All I'm trying to do is reduce barriers. Yes, you tell me what speed bumps are in front of you, I'll take care of them. You do what you do, but I tell them along the way, hey, you want my job? You got to deliver. If you don't deliver, you can't stay here. And Jack Welch was had become one of my mentors, and I used to do quarterly business reviews with Jack because he's
Bottom
part
10%.
of the Yeah, but less that and
No, I know,
more,
just is what I
and
was
more
thinking.
communicating to people each year in an open, honest communication. Here's what you did well. Here's what you didn't do. Here's what you have to do because your results roll up to my results. And I've made commitments to the board. And when you miss your results, you and I have to sit down and we have to work through what do you need to not miss them again? Because if you miss them again, we have a problem. And that's the way I adopted it to the word, how he said it. And because first thing he said was, if you ever fire anybody and they're surprised, that's on you. You have failed as their manager. I don't want to hear about they failed in what they were doing. You failed because they didn't understand what they had to do to stay to some way. Now you sit in front of them and tell them they can't stay. That's news to them. That's your fault. That's on you. And I changed the way I reviewed people, the way I spoke to people.
So you had this big moment. It's the sale. That was kind of that moment, at least professionally in a financial sense. You're like, hey, I'm doing okay. You then did you contemplate like a traditional retirement?
Yeah, no. What we did was the first conversation when I came home to my wife after my last day, because part of Fred's deal, he said, you have to work for me for 2 years. At the end of 2 years, do what you want.
Stay put.
Yeah, you got to commit to that or I'm not doing this. And I committed to it. On my last day after I left work, I came home. It took Carlene about 10 minutes to say, hey.
Yeah, go find something to do.
Yeah, no, you're not going to manage this house and me the way you've been managing companies. You're going to have to figure out. So I called my best friend down in Austin, and he had the exact same problem going on at the exact same time. He had just exited. And we said, well, you know what we'll do? And he was in YPO in Austin, and I was a chapter chairman in Dallas. And he said, why don't we get a YPO resource? And the 2 of them and my wife and I will go have a retreat on couples communication, which was great. But the real money part, at the last day we were there, Sandy and I were fishing out on his lake and said, you know what? These folks were great, but what we really want to know is what do we do now? And so we decided we'd ask the facilitators. We had 2 facilitators for 4 of us. Could you do this kind of event? And so 6 weeks, and they were like, yeah, that's what we do. So 6 weeks later, we had a 3-day event, which is how I opened my book. What happened on those 3 days, which was life-changing, that led me, frankly, to TPG.
TPG.
Yeah.
And what were some of the cool things you worked on while you were at TPG? I mean, it was 13 years. I'm sure you saw a lot of opportunities.
Because it was more family business back then, because the 3 founders were all involved, and then 1 founder left. Bill Price left, and it was Jim Coulter and David Bonderman. But they essentially said, your job is whatever you want to do, wherever in the world you want to do it. You'll be an ambassador of that portfolio. Anything interests you, you sit in all investment review committees, sit in everything with all the partners, and you just listen to what's going on. And anything that floats your boat, we want you to belly flop into the middle of it in any way, shape, or form you want. That could not have been more fun.
What were some of the really cool, just maybe 1 or 2 exciting business opportunities you got to work on in that role?
I was on the board of Petco for 10 years when we did a pretty massive change to building out a private label network, to changed out a whole bunch of the senior team to get a different feel in the C-suite, and had terrific results. And I love doing that. I love animals. I've always had an animal. You can't go to work for Petco unless you have an animal. Literally, that's a deal breaker. They can love you. You could be interviewing to be CEO if you don't have a pet, because everyone's door or cubicle or whatever is a big photo of their pet and the pet's name and your name's small under. It's very cool.
Does a 3-year-old human count? Like, because I throw him a ball and he gets it. I'm still, he's teaching him how where to pee.
Could be.
Reward him with little treats, little cookies.
So that was one.
I got 2 dogs for what it's worth.
Okay, well then you're still a candidate. So then the last one was Meijer department stores in Australia. The cool thing about Australia is it's the U.S. 50 years before. So I walked in the department stores just like I was going into my old department stores. Cool. I knew exactly what to do. So I was on the board and turned that thing around hard, fast. And we decided to go public. And we went huge. It was the largest department store in Australia. Went public. And the law in Australia is if a PE firm owns a company and takes it public, they got to take all their money out and get out and let it be public. It was the biggest IPO ever in Australia. So all of a sudden the Aussie government said, wait a second, $3.5 billion is going to leave Australia, Aussie dollars, and is moving to the US. And we said, you know what? That's the law. Let's do it fast. We got it out, and they came to close the account. The Aussie government did, and we were gone. And they agreed. They said, our bad, and they changed the laws in Australia.
Interesting. What was 1 or 2 businesses that you either oversaw, evaluated maybe as investment or from operational that you didn't do that maybe you wish you did? Or
how about that I did do and sucked at?
Yeah, there you go.
Look, and this is, again, my fault, but one of the founders of TPG asked me to go over to London and meet with a couple of entrepreneurs who had started a denim jean company in Birmingham or Leeds. It's somewhere in the Midlands. Mm-hmm. And we think we're going to want to buy them. Let's, let us know what you think about them. I said, okay. So I go and I have lunch with them, and what do I know? I mean, it was a great lunch. But I didn't know anything else. So they said, what do you think? I said, I think they're great. Closed on it a week later, and so I joined the board. Didn't realize all the issues. And 6 months later, we shut it down. And how PE works is if you're involved in getting a deal done, you have an upfront, you get some money. Well, I had gotten some money, and they said at 6 months, you're going to have to give that back. We're clawing that back. And that was my first ever experience. And what can I say? It's like, yeah, I think that's fair enough. And I gave them back their money.
But that was probably a cool experience being there and being able to kind of get your hands dirty in a lot of different things.
The other one that I was really, we still good on time?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other one that I really enjoyed so much that after my first visit, I told TPG I couldn't be involved with them, was a hypermarket in India. And so I went to Mumbai to meet with the founders and to tour stores.
India is a different planet, man.
Oh, man.
I just got back from there. Yeah.
Well, so So you'll know this, but the history of retail in India is carts on the street.
Doesn't surprise me. I didn't know that, but
The
yeah.
hypermarket that we were visiting was the first. Their whole niche is the first non-cart for Indian citizens who were moving on up. Okay, so I go into their stores, and I've never seen it. They were dirty. They were dingy. Bad lighting. Every red flag, if you were a U.S. retailer, would go up, and they said at the end of it, well, what do you think you can do? And I said, well, I think you guys have a lot of work to do. You've got to think about stores. Think about a grocery store if there was no wayfinding at all. There were no on each aisle. You didn't know if there's flour down that aisle or produce or men's underwear.
The signs.
Yeah, nothing. They had nothing. And they said something that immediately resonated with me and just proved how wrong I was. They said, you don't understand. These people have been buying off carts. If they walked into a well-lit, well-signed, perfectly merchandised store, they would be scared and run out. They couldn't afford it. It would cost too much. We would not appeal to them.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
This is as far as we can go. And if we're successful in 5 years to 10 years, maybe we'll tweak up a little bit. And then they said, and this is when I finally said, I get it, I quit. They said, we would like to show you, we think we're making great strides in our distribution center. We'd like to show you a new distribution center. And it was like an hour outside Tesla. I said, great. We took and all of a sudden roads get dirt. They're not asphalt any longer.
Yeah.
And we get to a bright, shiny new warehouse. And we go in the warehouse, and sure enough, there are racks, and it had to be at least 30-foot clear deck. I think it may have been more. It was staggeringly big. What struck me, though, was there were no ladders. There were no forklift trucks. At several places, there were strings of people who'd climb. There's one guy at the bottom and one guy just above him, and would pick up a box and hand it to him. That person would pick it up, hand it to him, and there were like 6 or 8 people, and that's how they got product to the top shelf. And they were very proud of that. They knew I was coming, and they were putting on a display for me.
Not a lot of OSHA laws out there.
And so when I got back, the folks at TPG, well, how'd you like it? Do you think it's something you want to join the board and get involved? And I was like, I am not value add there.
Yeah,
I got news for you.
Just a little bit outside your sandbox.
Yeah, it was an interesting trip, and it was like a field trip for a wonky retailer, but I couldn't add anything there.
Well, keeping this question focused on the States, what is? You've been around a lot of people. You've partnered with a lot of people, but a much larger bucket of people. You've managed or overseen a lot of people. What has been the common theme or characteristic in people that have gone on to achieve tremendous success, growth, and upward mobility in their careers? What has been the common characteristic?
From my vantage point, it has been their aspiration, having very high ceiling for their own aspirations. That does not mean they achieved everything, but that means they were aiming high. And there was a saying I heard once that was, life has the ceiling you put on it. And I have found that to be true. If you think that the ceiling is your job, the ceiling is your job. But if you say the ceiling is 2 rungs up, or being an entrepreneur, or working for General Motors, or whatever you say it is, and you're not there, you keep the people that I've seen that do well, that's their goal, and that's their North Star, for good or bad.
Setting high goals is that saying. Another saying is like, you shoot for the moon, even if you miss, you're amongst the stars. So it's like setting, lofty ambition.
Yeah.
And let me ask that question in reverse. The people you've managed or overseen over the years that just didn't get to where they want to go, just got nowhere, or failed out, flamed out, just again didn't necessarily have the success they were looking for. What was the common characteristic of that group of people?
I would say cutting across all the personality types, because there are personality types that take themselves out. Not being organized enough to deliver whatever it is you're supposed to deliver or you promised you would deliver. Just not getting to it. If you and I talk and I say, great, when can you have that to me? If you tell me next week and you give me the day, because I write down the day. If it doesn't come on that day, well, I mention it to you. It's not a deal breaker, but if that becomes the pattern, then you and I are going to have a problem because it just feels very natural that people should understand that in a company, you're all working, you're all trying to achieve the same. If you've got a good leadership and they've explained, here's the vision, here's the flag on the distant hill, here's what we've got to do, and on and on and on. And then if people can't be part of the group that's pushing together, they can't be part of it.
So reliability.
Yeah.
Yeah, Charlie Munger, I read it 10, 15 years ago, Sweet Charlie's Almanac, but like there's a new version, so I'm rereading it, and that's like one of his big things is like be reliable.
Yeah.
You know, because that covers a lot.
Yeah.
Right. And
it feels like anyone could hear you say be reliable. Most people can say, okay, yeah. I can do that, even though that maybe they can't or they won't or they.
It's not a complex concept to pick up.
No,
you know, it's not something that, you know, from a mental ability, anyone probably can't grasp. It's just being reliable. I mean, that covers a lot, right? Being reliable as it relates to your boss's ability to rely on you. Well, what is he relying on you? Is like, you know, he's given you a tremendous amount of task or responsibility. Can he rely on you? Or being reliable to your business partner, or in football, your teammates, you know? Let me use that to pivot. We've covered just such a tremendous amount of all of your professional success. You've also had a lot of personal success, 11 grandchildren. That's gotta be fun.
Oh, that just makes me smile. Yes. And that is frankly what we do. We
full-time
we
granddad.
Bounce around. Yeah.
I tell my kids all the time, listen, like I just had you so I can get the grandkids. That's unfortunately the career path.
My father used to tell my kids, he said, you know what grandparents and grandkids have in common? Common enemy.
Yeah, that's
right.
It's
like
fair enough. I always say my parents, like they're who they are to my kids is like, I don't know this person. Yeah. They give them ice cream all the time, whatever you want, I'll buy it for you. Like, you know, I'm like, well, that wasn't my experience, but they're like, because the roles and responsibilities evolve.
And I don't care when my kids say, don't do that. It's like, sorry, not part of your job description, but it's part of mine.
And I'll give your son-in-law a shout out. We were having breakfast and obviously big SC football. Now you two kids who went to SC. So, okay, you're cool. All right. But your son-in-law, Tavita Pritchard, was the quarterback for Stanford that beat SC. My brother was on the team. It was like they were 42-point underdogs and beat them. He's now the quarterback's coach of the Washington Redskins.
Commanders.
I'm going to get canceled for that. No, I actually heard that they may bring the Redskins name back because
there's talk.
Help me out here, the family or the person that likeness, the chief, they're like, no, we like that. It brought attention to our history. So
and I don't know any more than anybody else knows, but I do know that there are conversations.
Not that it's not important. Yeah, I don't care. But I heard the Redskins may have a good young quarterback. That's true. Right?
Yeah,
Jaden
rookie
Daniels.
of the year, and with
he must have a good coach.
Yeah, that's what everybody in our family thinks. It's amazing how we all became Commanders fans.
So it's funny. I see a pattern here. You've kind of positioned yourself to kind of cherry pick the program. Like you got the Stanford thing, you got this SC, you got the Texas. You know, like it kind of. I love when Texas was in the playoffs and going deep. Were you like, I'm a Texas guy now?
No, I have kept my allegiance to Texas. I love watching Stanford in any athletics, but my allegiance, I mean, I go back with Texas, and I've got on a silver spur belt today.
Yeah.
I was in the group that took care of Bebo.
Well, you didn't get to where you got to in life, especially professionally, not being not understand the customer. You were telling me Steve Sample, who was the president of SC when I was there, wonderful man, did so much for the university, invited you to the box for the Vince Young game, and you went in with an SC pullover but a Texas shirt.
And
I get
you know
it.
what? And I remembered when I was telling you that today, my wife went and sat somewhere else at the Rose Bowl because my daughter, who was at USC and a student then, she got to sit there with me, and that was just a great day.
It was a great day for you.
Yeah,
no, it was a really bad day for me.
I don't know about you. I have never walked across the back of seats in any stadium. I did that because in our group, there was only one guy like 10 rows in front of me who jumped up and cheered like I did when Vince scored touchdown. And I jumped on top of the seat. I walked on the back of seats amongst a lot of USC people who thought I had to be the biggest.
Well, luckily those SC fans on average are pretty nice, you know. But
were.
This has been super fun, Gary. I mean, incredible career. Obviously, you're still busy. You're doing consulting. You're writing books. Anything else keeping you busy outside of grandkids and all that?
Yeah, my wife started a business 13 years ago. In fact, when my daughter started her freshman year at Stanford, she and her best friend were empty nesters, and they started a business making cookies for teachers, for our kids' teachers.
Oh.
And I told them they ought to they were moping around when they took their last kid to college, empty nesters. I said, why don't you turn that into a company? And within a month, I came home from somewhere in December of that first year, and our whole entry hall at our house was stacked up with boxes. I said, what's this? They said, cookies. People are coming to pick up. Hey. They had started making them. And
what's the name of the business?
It's called the website is JK Chocolate, standing for Julie and Carlene, but it's changing name because my son has now bought half the company. And
hostile takeover.
And it's called microchip cookies. Okay. But if you tap in microchip cookies, it'll take you to JK Chocolate, and you'll see my wife and her friends' pictures in the store.
How do you survive having cookies all around the house, and you seem in shape?
Well, I'm in less shape than I should be with those darn cookies. But one funny story I did know when we went I built a building for them to move into, which I just sold, and built a 3 times bigger building, which is now a big commercial kitchen. And I walked into the kitchen, and all the crew in the kitchen in the first store, I said, look, guys, because I was worried about that. I said, look, I can't be eating these cookies every day, and my office is here, and I got a bunch of folks of my own that are here. It doesn't matter how much I beg, I want y'all to say no. And I'm telling you, I'm going to walk out of here, and in 10 minutes, I'll walk in and go, forget all that. Give me some cookies. The answer is no. Do you understand? Everybody went, yeah. I said, okay. 10 minutes later.
Cookies are my weakness. Yeah, I got to stay away from
Julie, I'm going to send you some cookies. Julie, Carlene's partner, knew every time I had a business meeting, I had a conference room there, that they would bring hot cookies in.
Hot cookies, yeah.
But just they are single chip chocolate chip cookies. So if you can imagine, each one is that big. It's the smallest cookie in the world. And you simply wouldn't believe what's going on with that business. And so I'm spending, since my son is now, we're starting to open stores, and I got a little bit of background with that. So I'm helping him think about that, but I am really trying to figure out how to automate the production. We have 50 cooks back there, so I'm trying to automate some parts of it and run the production a little differently. Maybe
God bless.
That's fun.
Last thing, what advice would you have for our audience as it relates to their mentality or mindset, how they approach their life, personal, professional? Let's put it all together. Just advice and adjectives, some way to describe, like, hey, this is you've experienced a lot of success, both personally and professionally. What guidance can you provide for our listener?
Yeah, great question. So aspirational goals are important for anyone, and it doesn't matter what they are as long as it's important to you. And then you've got to have the mentality to match with it, to build the commitment to making that aspiration come alive. And the aspirations don't happen by accident. You do, if you have your mind right and your commitment to it, and you believe it's a righteous goal, whatever it is, I think you'll be on your way.
Awesome.
You have to have those. It won't happen on its own.
Amen. Well, Gary, this has been fun. Congratulations on everything. I know you're still busy, still running full speed, so I'm sure a lot to come, but this was great.
Well, thank you.
Definitely looking forward to those cookies, unfortunately. And I'm going to come see you in Dallas. How's that sound?
That sounds great.
Awesome. Thank you.